Well, actually, it was it's September 2022. We were down here in Lake Gunnersville and out in our kayak, just kayaking around like I typically do on a Sunday afternoon. Came back and the next day I started feeling a little bit of pain in my back. So I decided to go over and see my family's Dr. Moody. And I came back and he asked me, he's like, Kevin, when did you fall? And it's like, I haven't fallen. It's like, no, I'm fine. And he goes, nah, something's going on. The imagery showed that I had a compression fracture. And he did a few more tests, a lot of blood tests. And he said, well, it's not good. You have multiple myeloma. And it's like, huh? I didn't even know how to spell multiple myeloma. And he said, yeah, now the good thing, it's not a death sentence. And it's like, okay. It's like, there's no cure to multiple myeloma, but it is treatable. And I said, okay, all right, well, let's start treatment. And so he immediately referred me to Dr. Schroeder. And so he actually came back from vacation, I believe a little early, looked at me and said, let's start treatment right away. And I said, yes, let's do it. And so I started treatment with Dr. Schroeder at CCI. And the plan was I had to do multiple rounds of chemotherapy, and then I had to do a stem cell transplant. And Dr. Schroeder did some research, and there's a center of excellence for multiple myeloma at Emory University in Atlanta. And he said, you should probably do your stem cell transplant there. And then January 2023, we went and do a stem cell transplant. And Dr. Schroeder warned me, it's like, it's gonna be rough, it's gonna be tough. And then my doctor at Emory even said, you want to wait at least 100 days before you go back to work. And I said, okay, well, we could do that. And started, doing that transplant early on. And when you go through that, then they do a massive dose of chemotherapy. It wipes out all the bad stuff, but also wipes out all the good stuff too. And so, we spent probably about almost 2 weeks in the hospital and going through that. And that actually worked real well. That worked for 2 years. And then, unfortunately, in January of 2025, they say, well, the cancer's come back.
It's hard, and it was very scary. You were on pins and needles the whole time. You were living from one test result to the next test result, and you were learning as you went along. It was life or death to us. What's the next step? What do we do next? And it was scary.
And they actually gave me two options. You could, do this trial that we have, or you can do CAR T. Well, in collaboration with Dr. Schroeder, we said, let's do CAR T. And we did that for 2 cycles. Well, unfortunately, after the second cycle, that chemotherapy stopped working. The myeloma started multiplying again, so it became very active. And so they said, you're gonna have to go through what's called DCEP. That was tough. That was probably as bad as going through the stem cell transplant, because it really wipes everything out again. But it worked. It worked. I mean, it was very, very difficult, but it worked. And so we went to Emory to do, the CAR T. Again, another couple weeks into the hospital. And you actually have to stay for a month close to, the hospital that provided the treatment. So pretty monotonous, but again, Tracy was with me, every step of the way. And, I think I spent 47 days in the hospital. And Tracy was with me every one of those days, and both my children were, came and visited with me and supported. And just that caregiving and having all that, caretaker is huge. I don't see how some people do it and not have that, because that makes all the difference in the world. And my brother has multiple myeloma, and so we spent a lot of time communicating with them. And my brother's wife, Mary Lou, she reads a lot also, and so we collaborated a lot. It's like, hey, I read this, and we belong to all the blogs and all the reading. And so I was fortunate. I had a really, really good, support group. And Tracy and I also have talked is, we're older. And I look back at it and I say, you know what? This would be so much harder if I was 32 and, we were raising children. those people have it a lot rougher than we have it. And also, you know, we saw a lot of young people, you know, you're going through chemotherapy, and that is sad. You know, they have their whole life ahead of them. And that, you know, so we're very supportive of, you know, and this organization is one of them. It's like, you know, those people really need help. You know, they really have to, you know, have some more support because, you know, they got a long way to go yet. And that's, you know, important to us too.